Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Frank About Health. This is the last episode of Black History Month, and for that reason, I thought it would be very mindful and very introspective of all of us to look at healthcare from a social justice perspective. I have very special guests with me. We all know Reatha Gray, who's been here numerous times. I'm very grateful to your support. I mean, Reatha, you are a living legend as far as I'm concerned. And at the same time, I had to make sure that I had you here because my honorary guest, the Honorable Tanya R. Kennedy, is here with us today to talk with Reatha. In fact, I even remember that was one of the conditions of making sure that Tanya was here today, that Reatha was here to also have a nice sisterly conversation. And then there's David Lee, who is a very interesting figure for our city, New York City. He is co-chair of the Mayor Adams transition team. In addition, he is a graduate of Brooklyn Technical High School, as is the Honorable Tanya Kennedy, and as I am. But both David and I also share the NYU Stern School of Business. So for this reason, this is like old home week, but at the same time for the greater good, which is to discuss about social justice and its outgrowth as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. As we've talked about here on Frank About Health, such as when Reatha and I talked about Omicron, there has been a lot of different issues arising, especially in the mental health care area, as a result of what it was like to be for 2 years' time constrained by limitations, restrictions, mandates, whether or not to take the vaccine, whether or not you were contagious for your loved ones, for your colleagues, whether you had to teach your students through Zoom or whether they were actually in school. So we're going to talk about the outgrowth of all of that now that a lot of mandates have been lifted. We're going to talk about with Reatha on the West Coast point of view, as well as with David in the New York City point of view, and Tanya with the state of New York, in addition to a lot of justice issues that she has seen. Let me give you a little bit of background on Tanya. Tanya is a jurist with the First Department of the New York State Supreme Court. And David, as I mentioned, is very much involved in city government, but he also at the same time has been an advocate for Brooklyn Tech alumni, of which he and I have had many numerous conversations in the recent past about how a school like Brooklyn Tech has been able to foster a lot of advocates, as whether they're in the legal profession or even in the healthcare profession, to be able to help create change in times like these. And we all know Reatha is one of the biggest advocates that we have had here on the show. So welcome to all of you, first of all. And then I just wanted each of you to take some time to point out the observations that you've noticed, especially over the last 2 years. So Tanya, first we'll start with you.
Good evening. It's such a pleasure to be with the three of you. Frank, not only are you an alum, but you have now become a dear friend. And as I said off camera, and I'll say it now publicly, David, it's just such a pleasure being with you as well, a Brooklyn Tech alum who is a public servant, and just for your outstanding work with Mayor-elect Adams at the time and the transition team. You know, certainly judges are not supposed to be biased, but I am biased about two things, and that is that Brooklyn Tech is the best high school in the world, and that New York is the best place to live. And we probably have some close seconds, such as California. And Reatha, I have to say that I was such a fan when I heard the podcast between you and Frank, and I really salute you for your advocacy and activism as it relates to equality for seniors and that they have appropriate health care and mental wellness. So let me say that I am a native New Yorker. I have been a judge now for a little over 16 years, and I now sit on the Appellate Division, First Department, which is a part of the Supreme Court of the state of New York. And Frank, I really salute you for this issue as relates to health and social justice, because the theme for this year's Black History Month is Black health and wellness. And certainly, as it relates to COVID-19, we're really going to talk about how this pandemic has disproportionately affected people of color. And certainly I'm here tonight in my personal capacity. So everything that I say is my personal opinion, and I am not representing the court system nor the court that I sit on. But I really look forward to a frank and robust discussion with respect to healthcare and social justice, because the two are certainly related.
Right, right. Thank you. And Reatha, now we'll go with you.
Well, I am certainly honored to be amongst this wonderful, wonderful panel here. Frank and I are actually celebrating an anniversary today. He called me to remind me, 9 years. We met 9 years ago today. Only Frank would keep up with that.
Exactly.
So I consider him an old friend now. And I have two East Coast new friends with David and Tanya. I'm really excited to have this discussion. I've been really kind of forced into the position of becoming aware of senior health issues. Mm-hmm. And it's really kind of sad what goes on, but there is hope. There are programs, there are things that can be done. It's having access to them that is becoming even worse with COVID, because all the offices are closed down. So I'm excited about having this discussion tonight.
And then David.
Thanks. I'm just really excited to be on this panel with you. And thanks, Frank, for doing this. And Reatha, I mean, you know, your work, the Betty White show and everything, and your advocacy now is just exactly something what we need, right? And, you know, we talk about Brooklyn Tech, and it's just, you know, people from Brooklyn Tech, alumni from Brooklyn Tech just have this understanding. It's very unique. And it's actually, you know, it's a root of social justice and diversity. The school, you know, it's always been a very diverse school. Yeah. We don't look at each other as, you know, we all have a similar background. We all came there from humble, most of us humble places. I know I was, and we went there to study. We were challenged. And all the students look at each other that way. And so in that sense, now when we come out and we see these issues in the world that we have, we can really understand and relate to them. And we see the need for the conversation around social justice, around inequities and unfairness in many areas of communication, of guidance, has led to the issues that have been magnified by the COVID pandemic. Mm-hmm. So I'm really glad to be here and meet you all.
Yes, great. I mean, all in all, what we are discovering is that COVID-19 in itself, a virus, had a lot of different influences in people's ways of looking at keeping their loved ones safe, determining how to keep themselves safe from either being infected or being a transmitter. Then there was all the different discussions and narratives that took place in the workplace, in the schools, in the cities at large. And we just realized that while we are recovering from this pandemic, we're all saying that it's about to become an endemic. That's great, but then there is the post-trauma of it all. One can refer to it as PTSD, or just stress-related anxieties. But we see it in people's changes in thinking styles, communication styles, the ability to re-interact with each other when we spent so much time, whether it was on Zoom or just being in quarantine. That in itself brings about not a pandemic, but an outgrowth of another social change that needs more guidance and direction so people can somehow acclimate to what is going to be related as the new normal. And I think that throughout the next hour, we want to try to uncover what some of those things may be, some foresight that we can provide to the listeners and viewers, whether there's legislation out there that can be considered, or whether there have been ideas that have been looked at as anomalies or things that really can't be debated any further. So I'm really glad you, David, are also going to be able to provide the Asian perspective. I'm sure, as we've been seeing on the news, a lot of subsequent negative issues have occurred, especially down in Chinatown. And I'm just wondering on some level if it has to do with an outgrowth of the social anxiety of the pandemic. So I guess we'll be able to see over the next 45 minutes a contrast between various cultures of people of color, whether it's the Latinx community, the African American community, the Asian community, and just the overall community of New York State. And of course, Reatha, with California being a contrapositive of New York, I mean, even from what you mentioned the other evening, that LA doesn't do what San Francisco does, which is what Fresno may not do versus San Diego. So it has its own mindset and culture that I think would be very interesting to observe and see how it all compares and contrasts with each other. Is there anything that any of you feel is the biggest mental impairment or mental health issue that has been an outgrowth of COVID-19?
I have noticed that they, especially among the seniors, but all age groups, that just the fear of COVID-19 has overwhelmed people to the point where they don't want to go out in public. They are fearful, and it has affected their mental health to the point where they don't want to go out and go shopping. They're overspending on Uber Eats or whatever it is that the delivery service they're using. And so I think the fear of getting the disease has overwhelmed people even more than the actual disease.
Exactly. And how about you, David? What have you noticed?
I think from Reatha's perspective, you talk about seniors. I see that loneliness is one of the biggest things for the seniors. That yes, the fear for them to go out, and then they don't go out. And when they used to see, and then they have the fear of going out, and then there's the fear of their family and friends going to visit them, for the fear of spreading it to those people. So in the end, they're home, days at a time without visitors, maybe weeks. And I see that as just really a terrible thing for seniors.
Wow.
That perspective, really.
And I guess, Tanya, you've seen that also, I guess, within the legal profession.
I want to add that there have been many articles regarding particularly attorneys of color, how they've been disproportionately affected, concerns about advancement in the workplace, also women with the added responsibility now of child rearing, taking care of other family members, along with the responsibilities of the job. But overall, I'm happy to say that the legal profession, I think, is really taking a look at mental wellness, talking about it more, because it's always been stigmatized, but removing the stigma and encouraging attorneys and legal professionals to speak out and ask for help. That's very important now, more so than ever.
Right. Well, we're going to get a little bit more into that detail after the next 2-minute break. So stay tuned right here on this episode of Frank About Health, as we are being frank and transparent and open about social justice issues in healthcare. Stay tuned on talkradio.nyc and Facebook Live.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy. and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant. And on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you on edge? Hey, we live in challenging, edgy times, so let's lean in. I'm Sandra Bargman, the host of The Edge of Every Day, which airs each Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc. Tune in live with me and my friends and colleagues as we share stories and perspectives about pushing boundaries and exploring our rough edges. That's The Edge of Every Day on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to this episode of Frank About Health. Before the break, Tanya, we were starting to talk about legal professionals, especially women and people of color, that you have noticed disparities in healthcare. Now, are you referring to disparities such as social inequity, or also you're talking about limited access, or are there other specific issues you've noticed?
Well, do you want me to get into that now? Because I have a whole lot to say.
Absolutely.
Well, let's go back, because really the issue is health equity.
Right.
And certainly the Centers for Disease Control, they define that as when all members of society enjoy a fair and just opportunity to be as healthy as possible, and that public health policies and programs centered around the specific needs of communities can promote health equity. And I certainly adopt that definition. And the reason why health equity is so important, because it bears upon a person's well-being and meaningful participation in society. So my comments before really just dealt with the legal community. There have been a lot of articles in various periodicals, New York Law Journal and the like, regarding the emphasis on health and wellness among legal professionals. But certainly, as relates to all of us, the issue is really health equity. And the problem with COVID-19 is that it laid bare the inequities in the healthcare system. And I know that we'll be addressing that. I have my personal opinion about that, and I know that we'll be addressing that.
Okay, and Reatha, I'm sure you've had some viewpoints similar to that, especially even in your own profession as an actress. You've seen different types of health equity issues develop while you've been getting tested regularly for different auditions and other kinds of things that you've had to do while going for your next opportunity, correct?
Well, in the entertainment industry, if you were working, it worked out well for you because you tested literally every day that you were working amongst the crew. You tested 3 days before you went near anybody to make sure that you were and vaccinated. They demanded very early in the game that you become vaccinated. The good news is our industry paid for it. So that made it convenient, as they are closing down some of the testing center, or most of the testing centers, and you're having to go to private doctors for vaccination. It is not as accessible as it was for everybody else. I mean, even for me, they would have testing sites that were open. You could go from 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening. The last job I worked, it was cut down from, I think it was 8 in the morning to 1 at noon.
Interesting.
So you had to get in early. And then they're using the self-testing on the set itself. So they don't have the booth set up for you to go and get tested and wait the 15 minutes or so. The AD does the test instead of having the professionals do it. There were some inequities in people that just didn't have access. Again, people are afraid to leave their house. Some of them had the ability to have someone come to their house,
Right.
but others didn't. So
would you say that in that case, they kind of viewed actors and entertainers as sort of like essential workers, the way that they would be vigilantly testing them here in New York City hospitals?
no, this is a horrible thing to say, but it's true. It's about the Benjamins. Okay. It really is. You shut down because your third lead actor has COVID. Nobody's happy. So it was really about not shutting down production, not having to leave, come back, which productions had to do.
Right. Right. David, you must have seen a lot, especially in the Chinatown area, or even within the boroughs of New York City, as Mayor Adams was about to transition into the administration.
Well, my experience with health equity is kind of personal, and I'm willing to share it.
Sure.
During the height of pandemic, March of 2020, I came down with COVID, and I was admitted. Long story short, I was admitted to the hospital. I was put on a ventilator for 3 weeks. I was unconscious for that time.
I didn't know that.
I woke up, and I spent another month in the hospital, and ended up, having a year to recover because my body had atrophied, the muscles atrophied. I had to learn to walk. But the story actually begins in getting treatment. In other words, when I was at home, and again, many things, but it ended up that I was advised to go to the hospital right away. I mean, immediately. And the hospital I would have been sent to was Elmhurst Hospital in Queens.
The epicenter.
Because the ambulance, right, would take you there. And Justice Kennedy, Tanya would know about these hospitals. And that ended up to be one of the most, I don't know how to put it, but that's where they had the trailers of people, of bodies in there. And I was just so lucky that traditionally my hospital was in Manhattan, that my family used for decades, because that's where my father's laundry was, and that's we went to New York Hospital, right? And so we always did that. And I was so I was so lucky to have that type of care. And the difference between that hospital, like I have to say, it's one of those Upper East Side hospitals where all the wealthy people go, and they demand a certain level of care, right? And then you have a city hospital in Elmhurst where you have so many tragedies. So, and I look back and I'm like, oh my goodness, just because you live in a certain area, okay, you don't get this care and when I was talking about just care, talking about life and death. Hundreds of people who just walked in, and I could just imagine, you walk in, oh, I'm sorry, you can lie down, and then the next thing, they fade away. Whereas here, myself, I go to a hospital. I don't know what was going on. I wasn't conscious, but it must have had. My wife was telling me, well, I just had tremendous care there. And just as a side note, I hate when people say, oh, like people say to me, my so-and-so was Asian, but quite honestly, the person who probably saved my life was a Black doctor. He was a resident. And, we all know the challenge of medical school and finishing medical schools for Black medical students.
Right.
And here, I saw him after I woke up, and here was this doctor who probably did something, with drugs or research and looked into it and tried something and probably saved my life.
Yeah.
Most likely saved my life. At that time, I was one of 8 survivors at that time because there was no treatment. It was early on. So I was very, very lucky to come out. So that's my health equity experience. And I hope that has to be addressed.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's very interesting. On one level, we can talk about just social justice, like an umbrella term, but we are really talking about literally demographics, whether it has to do with the elderly, whether it has to do with people of color in specific segments, whether it has to do which borough you lived in, whether it has to do which state you lived in. And I guess what we are all learning from this experience, and even as things are trying to reopen again, is that we had no guidebook in any of this. It was all a case study in action that we all had to learn from within ourselves and be able to hopefully share the knowledge that we all collectively obtained and hope that we could be as transparent as possible without any of the miscommunication through various media channels or other strange sources, if you will, that what you really couldn't identify where the information was coming from. So I think the only thing we learned how to deal with the pandemic at the time, as well as now as we're trying to reassimilate, is to rely on those learned instincts as well as learned resolutions from your experience with COVID, and then hopefully just educate others. So, I mean, it's like an umbrella term, as I mentioned, but I think what I'm trying to strive for, especially during this episode, is if there's a standard definition that we can all walk away with that would help guide us, especially to make the transition easier for most over the next few months. And I guess it'll just be a matter of what we further discuss during the hour to really come up with something like that. I mean, Tanya, what would you say has been going on from the work that you do? Have you seen active legislation or any active policies trying to be developed or advocated for in order to help the society at large?
If I may, I'd really like to go back to David's experience. And David, let me just say,
sure.
Wow, I was really moved just by hearing your experience and just look at you. You look like the portrait of health, and just thank God that you've overcome. But you said something that really triggered a conversation between myself, Reatha, and Frank when we were doing a little prep session, and even from an article that I had read and I still refer to very early on in the pandemic. And it's really about the social justice aspects of health, because you talked about that. We know about the various hospitals, but because of your education, your station in life, you were able to have certain health care. And I said during the session, the prep session, that social justice is central to public health.
Yes.
And I really got that from an article that I read very early on. It was June of 2020. I think it came from the conversation, but it talked about the fact of the various disparities when we look at the quote unquote low income workers, right? And they were redefined as essential workers. We talk about structural racism as relates to redlining in different neighborhoods. We talk about inadequate water. We talk about food deserts. We talk about the inability to have vacation leave, to have sick leave. All of these things, that's what really contributed to the high mortality rates of people of color, and then certainly people of low economic means, lack of insurance, lack of medical resources. So, I certainly can't talk about legislation because that's a different branch of government, but it really goes back to what David said early on about Brooklyn Tech. The bottom line is that since the entire nation has become aware of this health inequity. And it really started, and it's so unfortunate, certainly with the killing of George Floyd and the like. We became more sensitive to social, I'm going to say, injustice, where it was the public holding all of us accountable, all branches of government accountable, and to say, what are you going to do? So from this conversation, when we're saying social justice is central to public health, I mean, I got that from an internet article, but it resonated with me because it's true. Right. And the thing is, if we're going to really focus on healthcare, right, as the article says, that the doctors, they have to consider that as an element, the societal factors, right, when you're treating these maladies, certainly right now, COVID-19. So if we can kind of bridge it, right, it's about civic engagement, holding the leaders responsible, and then where, for example, you know, a jurist would come into play, right? It's certainly, you have to follow the law, of course, but you also have to be cognizant of the social issues and how that affects the people that you're gonna rule in favor or against, even the institutions. So I think it's important for me, at least, as a jurist, that you have to be aware of the social issues, and you have to have your, how would I say, finger on the pulse of the human condition. Yes. When you're deciding these issues. So that's why I think it's so important for us to be engaged in these conversations. Yes. So that we can share our thoughts. So that's what I would say, you know.
Well, we're about to take a break, and we actually went a little over because you were on point with where we are. I mean, I'm so grateful. My focus was for you to get that message across. So when we return on this episode of Frank About Health, I want you to go right for it, Tanya, and specify what are those issues that we need to be mindful of so that we can continue to engage with each other and helpfully help each other in reintegrating. All right, stay tuned right here on Frank About Health on talkradio.nyc and Facebook Live. We'll be back in a few.
And Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on talkradio.nyc.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law business law attorney and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc, now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to this episode of Frank About Health. Tanya, please go right for what you were just saying. It was so on point. And I also noticed your commentary about the issue of voting. I think that is very relevant at this point in the show.
Well, certainly I'm going to pass it on to my friends, but going back to this issue of structural racism, that it's a root cause of health inequity. I mean, that's what it really is.
Right.
And certainly as a jurist, I cannot be political, but I think it's very important with respect to civic engagement. I feel very comfortable in saying that the average citizen has so much power that they don't even realize. And it's to vote, because they can make a difference in holding leaders accountable by saying, you have to address this, making their voices known. There are various community organizations that can say, listen, the medical profession, they have to take in account to how these societal factors address inequities, which therefore addresses health inequities.
Right.
So I think it's incumbent upon the community to become more active and more aware of these issues. What's really important. It's all about the values of society. What's important? And I'm going to stop.
No, it is so on point. Reatha, I'm sure you have similar views from the conversations we've had over the years, especially when we worked on that documentary together. The thing is that we already know that society's views, whether it's in people in positions of leadership, they can influence people's voting power depending upon how they're communicating their message. I definitely liked a lot of the views that you had back then, pre-Obamacare, but I wanted to know how you echoed some of the statements Tanya just said.
Well, I just want to tell an old family story. My grandfather was a doctor, and I thought everybody's grandfathers were doctors because that's the environment I grew up in. And my grandfather became a doctor because his father, this is the story I've been told, that his father had become very ill and there were no Black doctors, and the white doctors would not come out into the countryside and treat the Black workers and farmers there. So he became a doctor, and he was practicing, I believe, in Nashville, because he was also a professor at Meharry. And he would go out on the weekends into the country to treat the poor Black people that couldn't come into town. Well, he would go, but when he came back, because he had a Cadillac, he would get beaten up by the police for going out treating them. So he decided, well, if I take my family with me, they certainly won't kill me in front of my wife and children.
Oh my goodness.
But they would still beat him up. So that's why he
God.
moved to California. And in the 1960s, I think it was, there was a Black hospital in the community. There were Black-owned banks and Black-owned savings and loans. Those no longer exist. They are not Black-owned. The biggest Black-owned insurance company, I believe, was here in Los Angeles. No longer exists. So it created an equity that we didn't even realize. Well, I didn't. I was too young to realize that if you didn't live in a city where there were Black hospitals and Black banks and Black businesses in general, you didn't have the same access to care, to treatment.
Interesting. So I guess, yeah, go ahead.
So that is the historical inequity that has always, I don't want to say always, but pretty much has always and has carried on. Now, my grandfather was a doctor, my uncle was a doctor, my father was a dentist. And what has been going on in this country recently has been with the insurance companies doing whatever they're doing. So in the effort to make more medical clinics, hospitals, doctors available, has formed all of these HMOs and these institutions that has forced the private doctors out of business, the private practice doctors out of business.
Yes.
And that's another thing that people I don't think really look at or think about. And the Black doctors, I don't know why they don't seem to thrive in these institutionalized hospitals. I don't know if it's racism. I don't know what it is. But you certainly see less and less Black doctors and even Black nurses. And you certainly don't have them owning the institutions. What were you going to say, Frank?
No, I was going to say that I guess with COVID-19 that shed the light, and as Tanya mentioned earlier, when we witnessed the death of George Floyd, it shined the light on what was already existing in history, as you mentioned from your story, and it just made it, exacerbated it, and even just reminded everybody what is still broken, and that social inequity appears to be here to stay, but what we want to do is make sure that's not the case. Go ahead.
And I always say it doesn't matter what profession it is, you need to have a woman in the room and you need to have a minority in the room because you don't think it through straight. I was working on a movie the other day and they wanted, this is terrible, but I'm going to say it anyway. They wanted the woman to kind of shake a little bit. And she had on loose clothing that it did not look appropriate. And there was one of the women said, "Excuse me, do you really want her to do that? Can we put a sweater or something? I don't mind if she shakes, but can you?" So I would say you need a woman and you need a minority in the room.
No, I agree. And David, we're about to take a break. As you noticed, we had to make a quick stop at one point, but when we return, I want you to wrap up and also make a compare and contrast. I mean, and we could talk more about Brooklyn Tech in relation to some of the dynamics that we've just witnessed from both what Tanya said and Reatha said. So everybody, please stay tuned as we're having a very frank conversation about social justice in healthcare right here on Frank About Health on talkradio.nyc and Facebook Live. Stay tuned.
Every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern for the Mind Behind Leadership, where we focus on what leadership really means to us and to others. We have practical discussions with the CEOs of some of the world's largest companies, owners of small businesses, and experts in psychology and behavior to get that inside track, what to do, what to avoid, and what really happens. Join me, Graham Dobbin, at the new time, 4 p.m. every Tuesday for the Mind Behind Leadership, here live on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Calling all pet lovers.
Pet Avengers, assemble!
On the Professionals and Animal Lovers show, we believe the bond between animal lovers is incredibly strong. It mirrors that bond between pets and their owners. Through this program, we come together to learn, educate, and advocate.
Join us live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. at talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to this last segment of Frank About Health. David, you have definitely heard very interesting stories. I know your story as well was very profound. which I'd like to share something similar, but I really wanted to get a sense of your perspective as to how you noticed it, especially within the Asian community.
Yeah, I really love the story, Reatha, of your family and the doctors, and it really takes us back to how, people of color, minorities are going back, into history, how we all have our roots in discrimination and, this type of violence. And that's just really where we're united. And so in many respects, a lot of that still exists, right? So, and Tanya, about the voting, they're going to be started on that. That's like the most key thing, because if we're talking about things like city hospitals, right, those decisions are made by elected officials, right? So we need better city hospitals to serve most people, right, and have lower income means. That's that's the only influence in encouraging that of our elected officials. But going back to, the inequities and discrimination and where it all starts, yeah, the Asian community had, when the pandemic started, Asians didn't know whether to wear a mask or not. They were vilified for wearing them. Oh, were you trying to scare us? Because the virus comes from China. Or if you didn't wear a mask, it's, why aren't you wearing a mask? You're spreading the virus, right? And then we know, and who knew that it would continue, and then we had a president who would just, exasperate the situation with his China flu and all that. So how far, and given that, and that's just not, it's not isolated to our community. I mean, that's something that we see in the news, yes, but we know that happens to all minorities at different levels, at different and continually. So, these things about health have its roots in inequity, and and talking about Brooklyn Tech, I spent years trying to find out what happened to, and it magnifies, why did the Black student population decline so rapidly from the 70s when I went there, right? It was majority Black and Hispanic, to being less than 10%, right?
Right.
What was, and of course we found that there was middle schools, lower schools. We find that income, and discrimination had an impact on this. And policies of elected officials devastated pathways to Brooklyn Tech. And that's really the root, and that's what we have to fix, and that's what we're trying to fix there now. Right. We're offering STEM education to middle schools and promoting gifted and talented, everybody's gifted and talented, but accelerated learning, but identifying and offering that opportunity to kids at lower levels.
Right.
I mean, that's a whole different other conversation, where we see that districts in Manhattan, in New York, some districts do not have any advanced programs or gifted programs, and they're mostly in Black and Hispanic communities. It's very clear. Right?
No, I agree. I mean, essentially, both Tanya and I were in the class of 85, and I think the majority of our class was 60 to 70% African American, and there were about 20% Hispanic, and the rest of it, I don't know, a mix of everybody else. But today I hear that it's about 60% Asian. So, I mean, it's very interesting how, in many ways, Brooklyn Tech has served as a prototype back then and now as to the way our society has shifted due to many social changes, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, or even other changes that have gone, have evolved as a result of who our leadership was at that point in time. And I think where it's continued to serve as a prototype is to be a model for trying to create new social equities, if you will, to be able to, all of us, to integrate our awareness of mental health issues and how everyone is a recipient of whatever programs or benefits should be out there for everybody. I think that's what I hope that this show, for example, helps to foster those kinds of conversations, as Tanya mentioned, because the only way that any of us can be responsible for what the results of any pandemic or any illness is by taking ownership over what we can do to help send the message out to the right people who will hopefully learn and further educate everyone else. I mean, together, like they say, we're all in this together. We have to be in the recovery together as well. And I think Brooklyn Tech, which is why I guess this is the Brooklyn Tech promotion hour. It is a perfect example of a school that has the population size that could represent a microcosm of what society can become. And
This is true.
that's what I'm hoping to see in the near future, especially now that this is our centennial year. Now we still have plenty of time to talk before the show is off the air, but I wanted each of you, starting with you, Tanya, then Reatha, then David, to let the audience and the viewers and listeners know how they could get a hold of you or communicate with you, or where they could find you next if you're going to be doing any speaking engagements, or if you're going to be doing any shows, hint, hint, Reatha, or if you, David, are going to be involved in city issues that we could all be learning from in the near future. Starting with you, Tanya.
So, in light of my position, I don't necessarily disclose what my email is.
Sure.
And things of this sort. Now, I am on LinkedIn. You can view my profile and see, my thoughts on various issues. But in light of my position, I think I really have to be very circumspect as far as how much information I disclose about myself. But let me just say that you'll see me on the internet from time to time, speaking on various issues. I'll leave it as that.
You're going to be on this Wednesday, I believe. I did see that on LinkedIn today. Do you want to share that, or do you want?
That's fine. You can share it, Frank. You can share it.
You're going to be at an African American leadership conference.
So it's in conjunction with Hunter.
Yes.
The Franklin Roosevelt Policy Center, and I may be screwing up the name, so forgive me. But I am so honored to join Basil Smikle and 3 other African American women jurists on the importance of diversity and inclusion on the bench. So just one more thing I'll say, because it relates to this as well.
Sure.
When David talked about the elected officials, judges can be elected or appointed, but also with respect to the judges. Certainly you should have a diverse bench as well, because that bears upon some of the issues that we're discussing today.
Right.
So you really have to be informed.
Right. I agree. Reatha, what about you? What are you going to be working on? Another Hilton commercial?
I can't ever talk about anything I'm working on.
I know.
But I do currently have a Hilton commercial out that you can barely see me. I'm on a phone. I also have I can't think of the name of the drug. It's a pharmaceutical.
Venuvia or something like that.
Covanuva. It's something like that. Which you can see me on. They've re-edited that commercial, but I'm still in it. So that's always a good thing.
Yeah.
And I've got a movie that I'm going to be shooting in a couple of weeks, but I can't talk about that.
But they can find you on IMDb to see what work is in pre-production.
Absolutely. You can find me on IMDb. You can find me on my Facebook page, Reatha Gray. If I don't answer you, I'm not ignoring you. I just don't always answer most of my Facebook stuff, but I do glance over it.
Okay.
and
yeah.
And hopefully I will have some more things that you will see me on.
Well, I'll be watching and DVRing.
I was going to say, Frank is my biggest fan.
Yes. And you, David, is there anything that we here in New York City should be aware of that is going to be happening within Mayor Adams' administration?
Well,
share?
yeah, well, the administration is still, again, they're just, you guys kind of being dunked in the water, and you got to swim, and there's so much to do.
Yes.
And we're encouraged that he's really, they have this thing called New York City Speaks. It's really an outreach program. And really, he's really encouraging people to speak up about what you expect from government and what they can do for government. And he's really honest about that. And I can say in as far as he's reached out much more to the Asian community in his term than previous administrations have. And we're so appreciative of that. And it gives us the opportunity to have, the difficult conversations that have to be had, especially about, living together all in a city like this and coming through all the problems that we have. So that is something that we're working on there. Of course, again, Brooklyn Tech, we've got the centennial, and I just have to say that really, Tanya, you're one of our most distinguished alumni, and we really appreciate. I'm really appreciate being on this panel with you. And Reatha, I just have to say, you just got a new big fan.
Well, thank you.
I'm gonna follow you. I'm gonna stalk you. I should have gotten on a thing with this guy David Lee. But I'm just really happy to be there. And Frank, thank you for having me on with such a great panel.
And thank you. Go ahead.
Can I just say one thing, David? I just want to expand it real quickly. You and Frank are also distinguished in your own right.
Thank you so much.
It means a lot.
I only have frank people on the show with me. No. More seriously, I am very grateful to you, Tanya, for all of the kind words and inspiration you gave me since we first reconnected at our last virtual homecoming. I'm looking forward to seeing you on a cruise in the near future. But at the same time, thank you, David, for also allowing me to be part of the centennial. And we're working on some other things together, which I'll actually call you about at some point offline tomorrow if you have the time.
Sure.
And Reatha, you and I will be seeing each other pretty soon in LA. I have news for you on that front. But I think the best thing for me to say is thank you to all the listeners of Frank About Health. This is, I think, the 30th episode that has been going on since May 2021. And I am taking the show on a chapter that is going to involve a permanent co-host that is in the medical profession. And the next 6 episodes will be exclusively about treatment and care for people of various illnesses. The next topic will be about diabetes 2, and then diabetes 1. And ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for our block of shows on Friday. There's always Friday, Philanthropy and Focus, and Wise Content Creates Wealth right here on talkradio.nyc. Stay tuned for the next episode of Frank About Health next week. And signing off to everyone, love you all. Thank you for being here, and I will be in touch with you very shortly. Take care.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.